Hello and welcome. My name is Matt Malik, and I want to show you that you can make a good quality recording from the studio in your bedroom, which is where I'm at. This was done recently for a church launch. We had a worship team. I played electric guitar, and we had our team recording through a Behringer X32. And this was done live. So let's dive in, just take a listen to the raw audio. So pretty decent. Now let's turn everything on. Wow, yeah, that's sounding pretty up to par. So let's talk about an overview here of how we got to this place and what my theory was with mixing. I learned everything that I know from YouTube and from experiencing different situations, experimenting with different techniques and whatnot. So let's go over some of that. The first thing you want to do is make sure that your tracks are imported and named appropriately to something that makes sense to your mind. So I've got, these labels that I can quickly find what I want. You can even color code if you want. I don't typically go that far, but you certainly can. If you have 100 tracks, that would certainly help. That all your drums would be one color, all your guitars are another, so on and so forth. After you've got that, you are going to want to normalize your tracks. This is very important because drummer A 1 week may play a little timid, maybe he's nervous, maybe he's tired. If it's the same drummer or a different drummer and suddenly he's in Hulk smash mode, you're going to be dialing in the gain just a little more differently. So you certainly don't want to have that much variation from recording to recording. So normalizing your tracks will make everything as close as it gets to clipping without actually clipping. So it'll make it as loud as possible without clipping. And that's what we want. So I know that I can dial in the same loudness roughly every week for this church that we're doing this with. This is done in Reaper. So whatever DAW you have, whatever you know to navigate, shortcuts and whatnot the best, that's the one you should use. Just got to be comfortable and familiar with it. If you're in Reaper, you can press, let's see here, you can either go to item processing and do normalize, or the shortcut here is Control-Shift-N. So I just, select all, Control-Shift-N, normalize all my items. So that's very important to have consistency. And we did a few different songs, so I had to make sure everything was the same. All right, so now that we've got our tracks set up, let's talk about the theory behind how we're going to dial in each section. I am a big fan of top-down mixing. Some people hate it. Some people have never heard of it. So what top-down mixing is, means you're going to start at the highest level, which is the master bus. Your DAW may call it something different. Buses might be called sends for you, or groups. I know them as buses. So the master here is where everything is dumping to. So most of the work is being done here. EQs, these are console emulation, tape saturation, whatnot. My compression, my loudness limiting. This is all done before I set up any other effects. So top-down mixing says start on the master bus. Then the next level is your instrument buses. So for instance, I have all of my drums being sent into a drum bus. And so then I can do all of my EQ that's necessary, my compression, limiting, without touching the individual channels other than just volume, of course. I have a bass bus. Typically I'd have a guitar bus, but I only have one electric, so didn't need to. My vocals got bussed into a vocal bus. This will allow you to make broad strokes in your EQs and affect the whole sound of a drum kit or whatever you have. I made these cuts to make just the raw audio sound the best that I could. And we'll get into that in a moment. So be thinking about that when you're setting your tracks up. You have your master bus, you have your buses, and then you have your individual tracks. And that's the order we're going to go in. So how do we get something sounding good? Well, that's where the static mix comes in. Static mix is where I can leave my faders and my pan knobs, leave them in place for about 80 to 85% of the time in a mix, and it's going to sound good. So this is all about balancing volume, balancing where things are in the stereo spectrum, and selecting what's going to be loud, selecting what's going to be in the background. Not everything can be up front. Some things have to be in the back, some things have to be in the center, some things have to be in the side. So let's turn the effects off again. And let's just get an idea, like if I start with my drums. Usually I'll start by dialing a level of my kick. Kick and snare should be pretty prevalent in a mix. So once I'm happy, those toms are a little bit loud, so I bring them down. But notice that I have left and right hard panned. This is something that I've learned over the years, LCR panning, as it's known. Left, center, right, LCR panning. You're going to have a lot of elements in the center of your mix, straight down the middle. So having a few elements on the sides, like these toms and these overheads, are really going to give you a nice wide sound. Now, I will caution you, if you have too much panned out hard like this, then if everything's wide, nothing's wide, so to speak. If we just listen to these toms again, you'll hear they kind of pop because not everything's panned out wide. Most of it's up the center. So here they come. So they really jump out in your ears. Right? So that's some things you want to be thinking about. So I've got the drums there, and how does that compare to my bass? So let's grab this and then my bass. That may be hard to hear depending on what you're listening through. But just general rule of thumb, that sounds pretty balanced. And then if we open up the rest of the mix. I'm also listening for things that I know I'll need to do later. Like, I heard that acoustic guitar kind of crushing at that moment. The guy was playing a lot harder because it was an exciting moment in the song. Now this is why it's a static mix. It's 80% of the time. Most of the time he's playing at a pretty standard level. can't hear him that much. Up here, well, yeah, you can see how much louder that gets right here. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, we got to control this part. So there will be compression later. And I actually have a limiter on it. And we'll get to that. But yeah, so this just gives you an idea. I know I want my vocals to be out front. That's the most important part of the mix. Musicians certainly will listen to their respective instruments, but for the most part, your vocals are... Everybody hears the human voice all day. We talk to people, and that's what our ears are geared toward. So I want them nice and out front. You can hear them better than you can hear the snare or the kick. But it's balanced, right? So this is what you want to spend a good bit of time. Just make sure before you move on to plugins and fancy stuff, this is the place where you get your foundation. This balance is incredibly important. And then once we get our effects and our plugins going, you know, we obviously are going to need to adjust a little bit, but most of the hard work is done already. So hopefully you learned something in this brief little overview of how this mix is coming together. Obviously there's a lot more, so stay tuned. But thank you for coming, and God bless.